Hey guys, welcome back to Fish the Moment. Today we're going to tackle a pretty interesting topic, whether it's better to fish shallow or fish deep. So let's get into it. Okay, so why am I making this video? Well, when most people start learning to fish from a boat for bass, they focus on fishing shallow visible cover because it's a lot easier to find those fish. You can just fish down the bank, fishing rocks, lay down, stumps, stuff like that with a jig, with a crankbait, cover water and catch fish. And it works pretty much year round across the country, unless there's ice on the water, obviously. But when I was learning to fish from a boat for the first time, I was always enamored by the guys who would go out in the middle of the lake and cast into what seemed like nothing and catch fish, and they would catch big ones. And I was like, man, if only I could figure out how to do that, I would have 5-pounders coming over the side of the boat all the time. And so I had this conflict of like, should I fish shallow because it's easier and I know there's good fish up there, or should I fish out deep because there seems like there's bigger fish but it's so much harder to find them, and it's kind of hard to find that balance. So in this video I want to explain the pros and cons of fishing both ways and kind of give some statistics on what I think is better, deep fishing or shallow fishing. Okay, so before we start this discussion, I do want to define what I mean by fishing deep and fishing shallow. And a better way to put it would probably be fishing offshore and fishing the bank. And no, I don't mean actually standing on the bank and casting out and bank fishing or shore fishing. I mean fishing from a boat and casting at the bank. And I consider shallow fishing or bank fishing anytime you're within one cast length of visible cover. That means you're either a cast length from the bank or you're a cast length from a weed line or the edge of a lily pad field, something like that. So you're within a cast length of visible cover. And then offshore fishing is when you're more than a cast length away from any visible cover. So you're basically out in the middle of the lake, you don't see any vegetation floating up on the surface, you're basically out in the middle of nowhere with nothing around you, and the only way you can figure out what's down there is using your electronics or a contour line map. And another thing I want to clarify is that when you fish offshore, you don't have to be fishing super deep. Most people think about offshore fishing as fishing creek channel ledges or humps that are in 20, 30, 40 feet of water. And on a lot of lakes around the country, you can fish offshore and still fish in 2 and 3 feet of water and catch really big fish. So when I say fishing deep, sometimes I don't really mean fishing super deep. I mean just fishing off the bank. And even subtle depth changes like a 5-foot ditch running into a 3-foot flat can be a big enough of a depth change to get those fish to relate offshore. So again, offshore fishing doesn't always mean deep fishing. Okay, so enough of all that other stuff, let's get into the discussion. So just so you guys know, I do have a preference for offshore bass fishing. And I think it's something I'm pretty good at, and it's something I love to do. And so right off the bat, I want to try to remove that bias from this discussion. And so what I did is I actually created some metrics based on my YouTube videos that hopefully will quantify the difference between shallow fishing and deep fishing without having my bias for liking offshore fishing creep in. So what I did is I went through all my YouTube videos over the last 2 years, and I counted all the times I fished shallow and all the times I fished offshore in those videos. And I found that I fished 22 videos shallow and 22 videos offshore, which is pretty crazy. It's a perfectly even split, and I tried to do that on purpose so I can show you guys a lot of different patterns, but I was surprised it was that close. And then what I did is I counted the number of bass over 4 pounds that I caught in those videos. So that's a 4-pounder, a 5-pounder, 6-pounder, anything over 4 pounds. And what I found is that in the 22 shallow videos, I caught 13 bass over 4 pounds. And then in my 22 deep videos, I caught 18 bass over 4 pounds. That means that I caught a 4-pounder or bigger in 60% of my shallow videos and 82% of my deep videos. So I'm catching a 4+ pounder about 22% more often when I fish offshore. Pretty interesting. Next, I counted up all the 3-pound plus bass I caught in my shallow and offshore videos. So that's a 3-pounder, 4-pounder, etc. And in my shallow videos, I caught 28 bass over 3 pounds, and in my offshore videos, I caught 38 bass over 3 pounds. So that means that I caught about a half a bass more on average in my deep videos than I did in my shallow videos. So over the course of 2 fishing trips, I'm catching an extra 3-pounder every time I fish offshore. Again, pretty interesting. And then finally, I counted up all the videos where I caught multiple 4+ pound bass in a video. And what I found is that in 3 of my shallow videos, I caught multiple 4-pounders, and in 4 of my deep videos, I caught multiple 4-pounders. So it's pretty much even there. And it's actually pretty common for guys to go out and catch big bags up shallow in one day of a tournament because you can just get on the right stretch and catch some big ones, but it's hard to replicate that over and over. And obviously I'm only fishing one day for these videos, so that makes sense. Okay, so what are all these metrics telling us? Well, basically what they're saying is that on average, I'm catching more 3 and 4 pound plus bass when I fish offshore as opposed to fishing shallow. And when I do a gut check of that, that seems right. I feel like I catch more big fish when I fish offshore as opposed to burning the bank. And just a side story here, when I was 16, I got my boat. And I actually got a boat instead of a car and had to borrow the dad's truck for a long time to tow the boat around, but that's another story. But when I got the boat, I'd been fishing for 8 years, and I had caught probably 25 bass over 4 pounds in those 8 years of fishing. Then, over the next year of having my boat, I fished offshore as much as I could. I was completely obsessed, and I probably caught 30 to 35 fish over 4 pounds in that 1 year span. So in the course of 1 year, I'd caught more 4-pounders than I caught my entire life before that. And I credit that mainly to fishing offshore and learning how to use my electronics to catch those big fish. Okay, so the metrics seem to say that fishing offshore is better than fishing up shallow. But is that really the case? Well, in part, I think it is, but there are times when fishing up shallow can be better than fishing offshore. One of those times is when the fish move up to spawn. Normally between March and mid-May, the fish will be in that pre-spawn to post-spawn mood, and you can catch a lot of really good fish fishing up shallow within 1 cast length of the bank. And normally when that time of year rolls around, I don't fish offshore hardly at all, and I'll still catch a lot of 3, 4, 5, 6 pound bass during that time of year here in Arkansas. I also catch a lot of fish up shallow in the late summertime when the lake gets really hot and the oxygen levels are terrible on the main lake, and sometimes the really shallow water will have better oxygen and you can catch some really big fish fishing shallow in like late August, early September. But other than those 2 times a year, I normally find that I can catch just as many fish up shallow as I can offshore and the same size. So in that case, is shallow fishing any better than deep fishing? Well, I still think it is, and there's 2 reasons for that. The first is that offshore fish are a lot less pressured than fish up shallow. Like I said earlier, most new fishermen that fish out of a boat like to target visible structure near the banks. They fish up shallow, they fish the lily pads, the logs, the stumps, stuff like that, because it's easier to find and they don't have to learn their electronics and their navionics to find fish. But because of this, there's a lot more people fishing the bank and fewer people fishing offshore. And so what's happening is that these fish are getting a lot more pressured up shallow, and so they're seeing a lot more baits, and it's hard to get those 3 and 4 pounders to bite, even if there's just as many fish up shallow as there are out deep. And another reason why I feel like I catch more big fish offshore as opposed to up shallow is that offshore fish will group up more by size than they do up shallow. What that means is that if I catch one fish offshore that's a 3-pounder, the chance of catching another 3 or 4 pound bass is pretty high. And normally when I start catching them offshore really well, I'll catch 4 or 5 3+ pound bass on multiple casts, like back to back, just catching big fish. And that's pretty common offshore, and it's less common up shallow, because a lot of times the bass are kind of spread out, and you just kind of have to fish down the bank and cover water, and hope you find a stretch that has a good one on it, and you'll kind of weed through smaller fish than bigger fish. Okay, so right now I'm sure a couple of you guys are yelling at your computer screen like, whoa, Johnny, I don't have any offshore structure spots on my home lake. My lake is a bowl, it's featureless, there's no contour lines or creek channels like what you show in your videos, so there's no way I could fish offshore even if I wanted to. And to that I say that's not actually true. And the reason for that is that on those featureless lakes, instead of relating to contour changes, a lot of times they'll relate to changes in grass or changes in bottom composition. So they'll go from like silty bottom to hard bottom, or there'll be a shell bed out there in the middle of the lake, and they'll relate to that rather than relating to all of the contour changes. And so you can still catch really good fish offshore, especially like in Florida. You can find big shell beds offshore or isolated patches of like hydrilla that are mixing with coontail, stuff like that, and that's what those fish relate to offshore. And you still can't see that cover with your eyes. You still have to use your electronics to graph for it or feel down there with a bait. And so that's why I say you can offshore fish on any lake in the country. And again, offshore fishing isn't deep fishing. You can still fish offshore in 2 to 3 feet of water. As long as you don't see what's actually down there, it's offshore fishing, in my book at least. Okay, so where are we at this point? Well, basically, in my opinion, I still think that you can catch more big fish offshore as opposed to fishing up shallow, because the fish are less pressured and they group up in schools by size, and if you know how to find them with your electronics and contour line maps, you can catch more fish that way. But if you look at the statistics, if we were actually in like a statistics class right now, you would say there's not enough sample size using my numbers to conclude anything. And there's a lot of other variables that go on there, and I definitely know there's good fish to be caught up shallow and out deep or offshore. If you look at any of my videos, I catch really big fish up shallow and really big fish offshore. So it's not super conclusive, but one thing I can say is that if you're not fishing offshore, you're definitely missing out. And the reason for that is that offshore fishing is a lot more consistent than fishing down the bank. If you're fishing a one-day weekend tournament and you just have to go out and catch the biggest bag of 5 fish in one day, then fishing up shallow is great. Normally you can catch the resident fish that are up there on the bank and load the boat. But in a 2 or 3 or 4 day tournament, those shallow fish sometimes don't hold up. And so you have to go offshore because those fish will replenish more and they're a little bit easier to catch multiple days in a row. And also, offshore fishing is just super fun and rewarding. And normally, if you can figure it out and you can get good at it, you can beat a lot of guys who just beat the bank and be a lot more consistent over time. So those are the reasons why I think fishing offshore are better. And again, very biased because it's my favorite way of fishing. But if you want to learn more about fishing offshore and give it a try, check out some other videos on my channel. I'll leave a bunch of links down below. There's videos on how to read your electronics, to see fish on your graph and find them that way, how to read contour line maps to find structure, and then tons of videos on offshore fishing in general, on like baits, lures, retrieves, how to position boat, all that stuff. So check out my channel for more videos on that, and hopefully you can learn how to get those big offshore fish in the boat next time you go fishing. Okay guys, so this video is a little bit different from what I normally do, but I still hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Let me know if you agree with my opinion about offshore fishing being way better than shallow fishing. I'm just kidding. Don't rip me in the comments, but do let me know what you think in the comments, and I want to get some good discussion going down there. Always interesting to hear what you guys have to say, and hope you enjoyed the video. As always, if you enjoyed, hit like and subscribe down below. Share the video out with a friend if you think they might learn something from the video or can kind of add something to the argument. And other than that, we'll see you next time, and good luck on the water.